Okay, Finlay here, we're back again. We're going to set out the pattern rafter this time, based on our original specification with the 5 key elements, which gave us the 8 bevels. Also gives us the key lengths so that we can actually work out the set out for the pattern rafter. We're going to do it to the specification you can see behind me on the whiteboard. We're going to work to the pitch of 24 degrees as per our original set out. We're going to deal with brick veneer construction. As you know, that's a 40mm cavity and 110mm brickwork sitting outside the frame. We're going to have an eave width of 300mm. That will be from the outside face of brickwork to the outside of the fascia. We're going to have a rafter spacing of 450. Overall building width, outside face of brickwork to outside face of brickwork, 3.6. We need to work out the half span in order to start setting out that pattern rafter. So it's going to be the full building width, 3.6 divided by 2, 1800. 1800 less one cavity and brickwork on one side, 150, gives us a half span of 1650 to work this pattern rafter out to. That's what we're going to base it around. We're going to be dealing with rafters in a size of 90 by 35, so our centering rafters, our crown end rafter, any creeper rafters, commons, anything of that nature are all going to be 90 by 35. The hips and ridge, going to make them 140 by 20, just for the purpose of the exercise. They can be anything, of course, but that's what we're going to work to. So you can see here, we've got a pattern rafter, we've got a blank set up, bit of 90 by 35 treated. We've got the bevel block here. The first thing I'm going to do on the pattern rafter is make sure I'm setting off the spring, the bow up, if you like, in the timber, the spring up in the timber. I'm going to use the bevel block that we set out, and I'm going to come up with plumb bevel common rafter. I'm going to set the bevel to that. Plumb bevel common rafter, there it is. I'm going to come to the end of the timber. I'm going to use a Sharpie to mark this. Right on the end of the timber, from the top corner down, I'm going to show the centre line. Whenever I do centre line, I put a CL through it because that indicates that it is the centre line detail construction with no members deducted off it. Not half the ridge thickness, not half the centering rafter, nothing yet. That's the centre line location. From that, we want to show the common rafter cut. The common rafter cut would be half the ridge thickness on each pair of rafters on either side of the roof. We can see that the ridge and hip is 20mm thick, so I want to take 10mm off this pattern rafter, and that of course will mean every pair has 10mm off it, allowing for the 20mm thickness. So when I measure this, I don't measure it along the gradient or the pump up slope of the roof. I have to measure it square from my original plumb line. So I'm going to go half the ridge thickness, 10mm. I'm going to put my bevel back on there. I'm going to mark that line. I'm going to call that plumb bevel PB common rafter, CR. I'm going to square that line across the top edge. Fantastic. I now also want to show the plumb cut for the crown end rafter in the hip roof. Well, the crown end rafter butts to the end of the ridge on the half span, and it is a deduction of half the thickness of the centering rafters, because we're all working to centre line. So half the thickness of the centering rafters, as all rafters are 35mm, 17mm need to come off the centre line to show the plumb cut for the crown end rafter, that rafter that braces the roof. So again, measuring from the centre line, back square, I'm going to take 17.5mm off. 10, 15, 16, 17, there it is. I'm going to plumb that line down. We know when I mark that on there now, that line is the centering rafter, C-E-R. Pardon me, crown end rafter, C-E-R. Easy to get confused between your centerings and your crown end as I think about it. That one is your crown end rafter. There it is. We square that across the top. Now we have the three key set out points for the pattern rafter. We've got the centerline detail, we've got the plumb cut for the centering rafters, PB centering rafters, and we've got the plumb cut for the crown end rafter. All clearly shown. What I need to do now is show the location of the set out length for the bird's mouth on this pattern rafter. So that's what I'm going to do next. And that's really very, very simple. Because we originally worked out that our true length, our pump up length per metre was 1.95 metre on a 24-degree pitch for every metre of run in the half span. Well, I know my half span is 1650. That's what we worked out a moment ago. So if I multiply my flat half span of 1650 by the pump up measurement per metre of 1.95 metre, that will give me a direct measurement down the pattern rafter to the upstand or location of the bird's mouth. Just grab my calculator, which I seem to have left behind. That's losing coin from the coin bag. Need that calculator. Woohoo. So as I said, the half span, 1.650, multiplied by our true length of common rafter per metre on a 24-degree pitch times 1.095 equals 1.807 metre. 1.807 metre. So I can hook my tape on the end of the timber, because that's where I set the centre line up from, and I can measure down that rafter 1.807 metre, and I can put a mark there, 1.80567, a little mark on the top of the timber. On that mark, I'm going to put my 24-degree plumb line. I'm just going to check again on the bevel block, it hasn't moved. Yep, pretty good. Whoop, it's a bit too long, it's hitting the bench. Just slide it back up, recheck it again. Put it on my mark of 1.807 metre and draw a line in there. That represents the location of the outside of the frame on the half span. Now I need to show the bird's mouth. The key thing about the bird's mouth is to measure the distance or the remaining amount of material left on once you've made the bird's mouth cut. It's called the upstand. On a 90 by 35 or a 90 by 45, something like that, a 75 to 80 mil upstand is the right size. I measure from the top of the rafter down the amount of material left on. The upstand, the amount on the upstand is the important part. 70 millimetres. I'll make it 70. I'm going to write upstand. $70 millimetres. You need that information on your pattern rafter. And then, from the 70 millimetre mark, I can now square a line back out there, showing the level bevel cut. Showing the level bevel cut for the common rafter. So I'll put my bevel on there, I'll swing it around and set it for the angle of the level bevel. Here we go. Put it on, top edge, line it up down there, carry that distance through. of bird's mouth. Key part being the upstand is left on. That's fantastic. So, bit of a revision. What have we got so far? We've got the centre line plumb cut. We've got the half ridge reduction of 10 millimetres, and then we've plumbed that down for the plumb bevel centering rafter. From the centre line, we've also marked half the thickness of a common rafter, or the centering rafter, for the crown end. 17.5 mil, we've marked that. We've squared those two across the edge of the timber. Then we've said, okay, now we need the set out length, centre line set out length to the upstand bird's mouth, so we can make that cut as accurately as possible. So we've taken the half span of the job, 1650. Once we've taken our 150 millimetres off half the overall width, and we've multiplied that length by our true length per metre, 1.095 multiplied by the half span. That gave us 1 metre 807. I've then hooked a tape on, 1 metre 807. I've laid it across the top on the pump up. I've put my plumb bevel on. I've marked the upstand in from the top down at 70 mil, and then I've used my bevels to indicate the bird's mouth. That's fantastic. The next thing I can show, from that point, I can actually show the Eave overhang if I wish to. I'm just going to square the upstand across the top of that pattern rafter. There we go. I can do the Eave overhang two ways. I can take my 1650, which is from the apex point to the bird's mouth. I can then add the 300 horizontal Eave overhang plus the cavity in the brickwork back on, because the upstand of 1650 is only to the bird's mouth, the half span. I can add it back on and then multiply that by the true length per metre to give me the length of the Eave cut. So I might do that just to make it simple. The half span, 1650, I'm going to add the 300 Eave overhang back on, 1950, and I'm also going to add on the 40 mil cavity and the 110 brickwork, giving us another 150 mil to give us 1950, 2 metres, 2 metres 100. Cool. 2 metres 100 is the plan length, 2 metres 100 multiplied by the true length per metre, 1.095. 2 metres 100 times 1.095 equals 2 metres 300 on the pump up length, 2 metres 300 centre line. So I can put my tape on, I can go 2 metres 300, I can put a mark there, I can go back to my bevel block, I can get the plumb bevel again off my bevel block. That would be the plumb cut for the Eave overhang. And then I need to take 20 mil off that for the fascia, because remember, the Eave overhang is 300 to the front edge of the fascia. So measuring 20 mil square off that mark and popping my bevel back on, I can actually indicate the tail Eave cut. There it is. Square that across the top. And of course I can check that. And the easy way to check that I've got that correct is that I know the Eave is 300. I know that I'm adding 150 to it to take up the brickwork and the cavity So that would be 450, 300 plus 150 is 450 as a horizontal plan measurement. If I multiply 450 by my 1.095, that tells me the pump up measurement or the raking measurement should be 493. So if I've done it correctly, from there to there, I should have 493. Boom, 493, right on the money, and then 20 mil off for the Eave. Perfect. So that's great. Okay, the next thing we can do while we're here now is the first creeper. And the first creeper is 450 off the centre line, down. 450, that's a plan measurement. In order to find out what the pump up measurement or the raking measurement is down the rafter, it's 450 in. I want the raking measurement down the rafter. I'm going to multiply my spacing, 450, as I did a moment ago, by 1.095. And that equals, as I said a moment ago, 493. So I can hook my tape on, I can put a light mark at 493. There we go. Bring that across to the edge. I'm just going to put a light dotted line there for the moment, because that is not the location of the creeper yet. Because we're centre line, what we have to do is come out with our spacing of the centre line for half the thickness of the ridge. So the way to do that is to realise from that mark we need to take half the mitre thickness of the hip off and then put half the thickness of a rafter back on. When I say off and on, it means off, the creeper is getting shorter. You can see, if I didn't have to do this, that would be the long point of my creeper to the upstand for the bird's mouth. That would be my first creeper length, and then the tail for the overhang, Eave width and overhang. So that would be long point creeper. So it's got shorter than the original pattern rafter. So when I say half the mitre thickness off, I'm talking the creeper has to get a bit shorter. And then I add half the thickness of a rafter back on. So the creeper has to get a bit longer again. Why do I do that? To come out of the centerline detail in the apex, because they've got members sitting around it. And I'll show you that when we do the demonstration with the actual roof. So I said I have to take off half the mitre thickness of the hip. What I've got a bit of hip there, drawn, showing the edge of 20 mil. And I want to know what the full mitre thickness is of that piece of hip. I've just lost my marker. There it is. The mitre thickness. What that means is, if I put a mitre on there at 45 degrees, what is the full length of that line? That's a mitre line from one side to the other. Well, I know it's 20 mil thick, and I know a mitre is at 45 degrees. So I can say 20 mil divided by cos 45 will tell me how long that mitre line is. 20 mil divided by cos 45 degrees equals 28.3 millimetres. That full length of line there is exactly that, 28.3 millimetres. Well, what I want is half the mitre thickness. So you have to divide that by 2. And that's 14 millimetres, close enough. $14 millimetres is half the plan mitre thickness. So from that first long point creeper, I want to measure back 14 millimetres. That's exactly what we're going to do. 14 millimeters, 10, 15, 14. I put a little mark there. That's half a miter thickness off. Now from that line, I want to add half the thickness of a rafter back on. Half the thickness of a rafter, my rafters are 35, half that thickness is 17.5. So from that line forward, I want to add 17.5 mil back on. I'm going to line that up on 100, 0, 200 there. Go 15, 16, there's 17.5. I'm going to mark that line all the way up. That is the long point of my first creeper. There we go. I'm going to square that across the edge. That will indicate to the apprentice, when I pass this to the apprentice to set out all the rafters, that's the long point of the first creeper. These others are just my set out marks. Fantastic. Now from that point, I can do all my creepers now 493 spacing, because they're at 450 in a plan length. And I know 450 in the plan multiplied by the pump up measurement of 1.095 turns 450 from plan into a direct measurement down the rafter of 493. So I'm going to hook my tape on there. I'll hold it on 100, I'll go 4, in fact what I'll do, I'll go 493. I'm going to hook my tape over, measure to that line, which is 487, just to that line there, and then I'm going to add 493 to it so I can get a progressive measurement. So 487 plus my creeper spacing for the second creeper of 493, 980 millimeters. I'm going to put 980 millimeters as a mark there. That's a long point of the second creeper. Then I want to go another 493 plus 493 equals 1473. So now I'm going to put a mark at 1473. There it is. These are the progressive measurements that we've done before when we did stair string set out. It's pretty much the same sort of process. 1473 plus the next creeper, 493 further on, 1966. 1966 is right there. We've gone past the upstand and we're almost near the tail on the eave. Will I get another creeper in there? No, I won't. So that would be the last one. That's great. So now I can pick up my plumb bevel. I can come back to each of these locations. I can mark in the second creeper. I can mark in the third creeper. I can mark in the fourth creeper. Sorry, you're looking at the top of my head. I square those across the top edge. That will indicate to the apprentice they are the key marks. And job done. We now have a pattern rafter fully set out to suit that job. How good's that? Thanks very much. Must be coffee time.